Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome once again to the California-Nevada Chat here on Friday, August 12th. My name is Len Dumas, Executive Director and Chief Operating Officer for the Northern California section of the PGA of America. And we once again thank you for your continued support of the program. To our co-host, Tom Addis, Executive Director and CEO of Southern California, Nikki Gatch, Assistant Executive Director and Chief Operating Officer, and Jeff Johnson, Chief Finance Officer, and our production team, Bryce Seaver, Steve Monday, and Shelby Zell. Thank you all for being here. You know, our pace continues as we wind down this time of the year, these first 2 weeks of August. We've had some section championships around the country, and a lot of our junior programming is coming to the championship level to get to the final. So we're still at it, and we look forward to some fall tour events. The FedEx Cup playoffs are underway. You know, today we have round 2 at TPC Southwind Championship in Memphis. So we're always exciting to see the playoffs unfold. Our guests this morning are Greg Raleigh. Greg is financial advisor for Waddell and Reed in Reno. And many of you may remember Greg was with us early on when we started on the air, if you will, back in March and April of 2020 as COVID was unfolding. And Craig Kessler, Southern California Golf Association Director of Public Affairs. And we'll catch up with Craig on what's coming at us now in the California legislature and some national initiatives as well. So our Northern California PGA president, Eric Lippert, is unable to join us, but he does send his regards. And at this time, I'd like to invite our dear friend, Tom Addis, for some opening remarks. Tom?
Thanks, Len, and good morning, everybody. As Len mentioned, these are exciting times. Robin Shelton, our president, is unable. They're finishing up and in their opening process of their new remodel at Newport Beach Country Club. So kudos to Robin and Newport Beach for that. Yeah, it is an exciting time with the playoffs started and last week, the drama that we always experience with this kind of one of my favorite times of the year. The drama that we experience with the top 125 and now with Korn Ferry and the last event of the year, other than the Korn Ferry playoffs coming up. This is the last weekend of the regular season in Omaha. And of course, the top 125 watch there, and the watch that some of these players will keep their cards and move into the Korn Ferry finals. So I really enjoy this time of the year watching this competition. I'm going to boast a little bit. It was mentioned about juniors. We had Southern California in the USAM women's amateur. We had 16 young women and women playing, competing in the women's amateur this year, which is pretty exciting, and we're very, very proud of that, and how well our juniors, both boys and girls, have done through the year. So Len, thanks, and look forward to listening to Greg. Greg was extremely valuable, as Craig has been all along. Greg, extremely valuable during the COVID months, and rendering and offering advice to our PGA professionals and their businesses as we move through that period, and we'll always appreciate that. So Greg, it's nice to have you. Len, your tea.
Yeah, thank you so much, Tom. Again, congratulations on all those juniors experiencing so much success. And then, you know, as an organization, as the PGA, we're at that point where those that have gone through our drive, chip, and putt program in our junior league are starting to have very successful college careers and even nipping at the tours as well. So that's a great thing. It shows you the passage of time, but the success of the programs as well. So well done, Tom. Well done. And Greg, welcome back. It's been a while, and we appreciate you taking the time. So Greg, let's roll back the clock a little bit again. Greg is a financial advisor with Waddell and Reed in Reno, and we got in touch, Greg, back in March, April of 2020, which is yesterday and a lifetime ago at the same time. And Greg, back then, we didn't know what was going on. Every day was a new policy, a new regulation, a new idea, a change to a former policy, a change to a former regulation. So Greg, talk a little bit about that time and how that brought us right here to 2.5 years later in August.
Yeah, I mean, thanks, Len and Tom, for the invite this morning. If we go back there, back on February 14th of 2020, the Dow had hit a little over 29,000. And, within a month, by March, March 20th, it was down under 20,000, so it had lost 30%. There's a lot of uncertainty. And, obviously COVID was something nobody understood what was going on. We didn't know how bad this was going to get or how good it could get. You know what I mean? I mean, to be fair and how things went. So there's a lot of uncertainty. One of my jobs at the time was to stay on the front lines with the banks to find out what the government was doing to help businesses to get through all of that. And one of the programs was PPP and the Payroll Protection Act and so forth. And a lot of golf professionals and business industry individuals took advantage of this. And, like any program, it's easy to get into. But, talking to Len and Tom this morning or this last few days, we thought there'd be some value on giving some of you who were participating in that a little bit of guidance on how to get out of it. Because there is an exit that's required with this program that if you did take that money, if you don't finish the program, you're basically considered a loan rather than, the grant. Okay. So if Bryce and Steve will pull up, if you guys can show on the PDF that I sent over to you guys, this is the forgiveness application. And even though on the top right, it says expiration 1/31/2022, if you did take money and have not applied for forgiveness on that loan grant yet, this is the form you want to start with. And it's not a hard, you can see it's the easy form. There's not a lot going on it. If you need this, just talk to Tom and the crew here and they'll send it out to you. The link to this form, it's on the SBA website. And then, complete it, send it back into the banker that you worked with or the bank that you worked with, or if they're not around or you don't have access to them and you're working with a new banker, a different bank can submit it as long as they were participating in this program. You don't have to go in through the company you went in through originally or come out or get forgiveness from that. Yeah, it's just an SBA form and they can submit it for you. So we wanted to make sure that you guys knew, that everybody on the call knew that this was a step. So that way, 5-10 years down the line, you're not getting some notification from the SBA saying you have an outstanding loan and you owe this, these monies are due and yada, 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 all those kind of things, which nobody's wanting that to happen. So I think that was really the gist of what we're doing here today is to answer any questions with regard to that. I don't work for the SBA, full disclosure, but I can kind of help anybody who's having trouble getting this where it needs to go, get where it needs to go, basically. Len, Tom, is there anything else you guys would like me to cover or any of the attendees would like me to cover in this topic?
Yeah, Greg, let me ask you this. Yes, it did. It came down as forgivable loans. And as you point out, the forgiveness process is almost administrative more so than anything else. Mm-hmm. But in the meantime, is there interest accruing on these loans?
It looks like there's a little bit of interest on here. It wasn't, I don't remember exactly. It probably says on the form here, Len, it was extremely low interest. It was going to be like 1 or 2%. That's why, a lot of people took these loans and took them as loans rather than just grants, because there was no place where you're going to get money at this rate. No bank would lend you at this rate. You know what I mean? This was a federal government small business loan that was going to be better. And I don't think it was secured. It was just a very friendly loan program. So if you did that program, this isn't where you want to go. Obviously, you want to continue to pay that and within the rules, or call your banker for the details. But if you did get a forgivable loan, this is the form you want to complete to have that forgiveness just finalized and have that letter from the SBA on file saying this was forgiven. You're free and clear.
Right. Greg, thinking back, we did have 2 volleys, right? Because the demands on the first program, the money was gone in almost about 48 hours, correct? Yeah.
Correct. There are actually 3 if you really went into it, and they actually categorized the first 2 into what they call the first draw, and then they categorized the second into the second draw. And what happened was there was so much demand and government didn't know how much to allot into the bucket. they had put aside. And that bucket got sucked up so quick because I think you had like the LA Lakers that figured out how to, who are some of the bigger names that took out some of that kind of thing, so you had some big names pulling money out of there rather than the small businesses only. So government came back in and created a second bucket on the first draw. And then the second draw required you to have a continued business if your business was continuing to struggle. So my guess is that most golf pros and pro, as well as things went by July of 2020 for most people in the golf business, there wouldn't be too many second draws going in there. But if there are, the information is here for that as well.
Greg, define the difference a little bit between the EIDL and PPP to remind everybody and who might have forgotten the difference between the two, repayment, et cetera.
Yeah, the EIDL was a completely separate program that really you ended up doing. There was a lot of confusion at one point whether you could do both or individual. If you did PPP, you generally didn't do EIDL. So I didn't, there was so much more money in PPP, Tom, that I really didn't get much into it. EIDL was really a disaster fund that was originally set up for the natural disasters and all of that kind of thing through the SBA. And they were going to try to use that. And it got some people some money originally, but then they netted it out of PPP. So if you started with one and went to the other, if you were really early in the process, other than that, PPP really didn't allow EIDL to happen much. And they ended up netting it out of what you got with PPP. So that's a convoluted answer for generally just work with the PPP. And if SBA does come back to you on EIDL, it's more of a one-on-one rather than a big program. PPP was the big daddy in this case, if that makes sense.
EIDL was a much smaller amount that I recall as well.
Yeah. And we had, like, for example, when I applied to my own business to get this, I got EIDL immediately. I mean, it came in super fast, but then they realized that's not where they want to pay from and not that bucket. So they stopped paying out of EIDL and just did PPP only. And they netted our PPP from EIDL, if that makes sense, because it came from basically the same organization. So really, it was only the early adopters like myself that really got in super early. And then after that, they really just did PPP only. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. We at my wife's business up in Mammoth did both. And I honestly can't recall whether they netted it out. My accountant obviously would know that, but I can't recall whether they netted it out because we also received PPP.
Right.
So I'll have to check into that.
Yeah, and it's something to pay attention to. But like I said, I know because I was the one who was actually physically doing it with my banker. Our PPP was net of what they gave us EIDL, and that way we didn't create a double loan scenario. You know what I mean? And we just had to pay the PPP back.
Yeah, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Greg, are there stats? There was so many iterations. I remember 501c6s, which are chambers of commerce around the country, and the PGA of America, as a matter of fact, is a 501c6, as are the sections. We were initially out and then in. But of the businesses that applied, are there statistics about how many were able to survive because of the various programs and how many may unfortunately be gone?
I'm just kind of looking here, Len. I don't see anything in terms of the government. I'm sure there's some party or some foundation organization that probably put that out on a negative spin, or you know what I mean, to make whatever point they're trying to make. I don't know. I'm sorry, I don't have that information.
Totally get it. Greg, so as the overview, a little bit higher up, would we say, and again, there was so much, we read reports to your point, right, about fraud and so on and so forth, and PPP money going to homes and cars and so on and so forth. Would we say that the program was successful? Because it was, billions and billions and billions. It seemed like it wasn't going to end.
Yeah, from a boots on the ground standpoint, I can tell you that the hairdressers, the restaurants, it was invaluable for the boots on the ground businesses that, the service businesses that got crushed. I was just over a little bit of a sidebar. I was just over in Kauai and was in Kapa'a over in Kauai. And I was in a restaurant there talking to the bartender. And she was saying that what got them through was PPP was paying the construction owners. Construction people were not working, but they were being paid. The construction workers would then go to the bar, drink, and the only reason the bartenders had any tips or money was because these people that were getting PPP were spending it. You know what I mean? So it was sending money through different industries. So there was a much deeper benefit to that money, and you could see it boots on the ground, especially in these places that were hit so hard. With no travel going to Hawaii, right? The only tips they had coming in were literally PPP money coming to the construction, that kind of a thing. So in terms of indications on whether that worked, I've got a number of clients. A lot of people didn't need it. I mean, quite honestly, we would have been okay. Like my own business here, most golf industry people would have been just fine with as fast as golf came back and was the only thing you could do. But man, were there other industries who they survived only because of it, mostly restaurant and small business that were service providers. And like I said, most notably the hairdressers, that kind of people that people were couldn't go get your hair cut. I mean, that's, I think what you said, Len, you had a lot more hair back then, back in 2020. There's a lot going on.
Yeah. Thank you for reminding everyone.
Right.
So
we have in Mammoth, and of course it's a ski area. And we have 2 stores up there that without it, we would have probably shut down, but it allowed us to not only maintain a couple of people working to keep the doors open. We had to limit our days in some cases, and it allowed us though to have at least someone there who could still produce our product for the people who were in Mammoth and mostly the locals, because there weren't too many people traveling to the ski area and then later in the summer. So it was very beneficial to us in allowing us to keep our business going.
And that's great to hear, because that was the purpose of the program. We flourished, if you will, in working with the CDC as an industry in the terms of the social distancing that golf presents in its own, but yet, Greg, to your point, Tom, to your point, personal services, haircuts, so on and so forth, that's all about being close. And
Right.
so if those were the cases, then that's exactly what we would hope to happen.
Yep.
Yeah. So Greg, what's going on now? Has it settled down? One of the items that came out of this, if I remember at the end of April in 20, was that independent contractors were able to apply for unemployment.
Mm-hmm.
So is that still in place to your knowledge?
Yeah, I mean, obviously PPP is done and gone, and all of those programs are pretty much over. They really did try to work to what they called them gig workers. You know what I mean? The independent contractors, they wanted to make sure those workers were still covered within that. A lot of that came in on that second draw. It wasn't real. It really put a lot of pressure on them because it took time for them to get that one through. But gig workers they benefited on that second draw more than the first draw because of all of the organization that had to happen. And the quick to the well that a lot of us were that emptied the original well of those funds. But you can argue both sides of how much it was needed, and obviously golf pros, things got cash flush there for a while, so it's easy to get comfortable on that side of it. There were a lot of people that were struggling, and did it go on for a little too long? I mean, you can see just from like your Uber drivers. I talked to the local Uber driver who said they couldn't get Uber drivers because they were making more money staying home. You know what I mean? Because the program's on for the gig workers and that kind of a thing. But obviously, better to be a little bit too long than too short in that regard to make sure nobody's because we just didn't know. I mean, you had the original. I don't want to get political on this, so just more on the biological side of you had COVID, then you had nobody knew Delta was coming, nobody knew Omicron was coming. I didn't know I was going to do all that. So we wouldn't have expected to last this long. It is benefiting the golf industry because golf is where people can send and play outside, So, not that the word benefiting from a pandemic is not my favorite way to put it, but that's just the facts. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Greg, well, you bring up a really important point is that the nature of the workforce has changed as well.
Mm-hmm.
And to a large extent, it's a buyer's market right now. All facilities that we're aware of in the industry almost are looking for help.
Right.
There's some very prominent positions open. I think it's a combination of during that time, people found other industries to move into or are just wanting to approach their work life entirely different. So the workforce has changed because let's say the attitudes, the approach, and the availabilities, and to a positive side too. If we come to a point where we can, reduce some hours and get more people home, then that's a positive that came out of it. But it is a different world.
Right. And you're at a point now, and from an economic standpoint, where last February 2022, you had 5 jobs for every one person looking. We're slowing down a little bit to 2 jobs for every one person looking. Inflation is coming, not just top line of what you hear in the media. Inflation is coming down on the inputs with the commodity prices. Supply chains are normalizing, which need to happen with supply and demand. So, you can argue one way or another. There's bulls and bears on both sides of this, but things are starting to normalize and come back to the averages. And I think that's a good thing for everybody because, being too high, too low for everybody kind of throws things off.
Yeah, even the restrictions, as you've seen, at least posted, are coming down, whether it's face coverings, masks, or whether it's safe distance, whatever that might be. There's a removal of those restrictions every day, whether it's through the CDC or local agencies. So we're seeing a lot of change.
Yeah, and it's resulted in a strong surge of demand for travel. It's good for the golf industry or for those that are travel destinations, concerts. Went to the Masters this year with a friend. The 1-day ticket for Wednesday or Thursday. No, it was Thursday. No, Wednesday. Sorry, it was $2,000. I mean, the prices are just because everybody wants to get out and go do stuff, and they can do it now without masks on. So we see that happen. That's another year of strong demand in that, and then things should normalize out.
So has the effect, Greg, again, some facts, some opinion, right? Has the COVID effect worked its way through the stock market, if you will? I mean, we've moved on to some very serious world affairs in the past 12 months, but everything has a cycle, and sometimes there are some lingering effects.
Yeah, I mean, it just sort of depends, Len. Like I said, it goes back to Delta and Omicron, right? When the words transitory inflation were legit, we were thinking that we didn't know Omicron and Delta were coming down the line. We just thought that was going to be done in a year and one and done. And then all of a sudden, boom, there's Delta, and boom, there's Omicron. Now, if it just sort of depends on if we can keep the variants minimized, then we're going to be okay. But if we continue to get these variants and keeping things subdued, and keeping a lid on workers being able to go to work and people being able to travel, and that keeps demand up and supply down, and that creeps prices up because you have an imbalance between the two. You're going to keep inflation up in that situation. So it really depends. There's a whole economic discussion on all the other economic indicators. We can get into all of that stuff, but just for this conversation, when it comes into just COVID, it just depends on whether or not we get another variant or not.
Another variant that we can't seem to control.
Correct.
Right. Because right now we have at-home testing going on, and people have been double vaccinated and such, and responses are high. So let's, knock on the table. So far, so good at the moment.
But I've got an example here. Like, I'm trying to get a window replaced. It was just a window that randomly cracked, and trying to get them in, and the contractors are, they've got COVID. They can't come in. So they're still, even with the testing, it is slowing things in the economy. That's just going to be a factor until we can kind of get through all of this.
Right. Well, Greg, we can't thank you enough for your time this morning. Again, it's been a while, but you were with us at the beginning and took us through times online, in this forum, how to fill out forms. And I know you did that with many personally, one-on-one as well. So we really appreciate your continued support, and thanks for the work that you're doing, Greg.
Thanks. A quick little sidebar before you move on. Tom, you're sending up one of your juniors up to Northern Nevada. Her name is Gabby Cano. She's one of the top female juniors in the country. She's coming up to play for UNR, and we're going out to dinner when she comes out with her parents here this next week. So
great.
Keep sending your top juniors up to Northern Nevada. We appreciate it.
You got it. As long as they get an education, that's for sure.
Go Wolfpack.
So, Greg, to that point, expect an invoice, because somehow Mr. Addis always finds a way that somebody who comes up here needs to pay dues in the Southern California.
We'll get her into the program. We'll make it work.
All right. Thanks, Greg.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Greg. Okay, terrific. Tom, thank you for getting Greg. That was just great. Amazing how much has happened in 2.5 years. So now on to our Director of Public Affairs for Southern California Golf Association, Mr. Craig Kessler. Craig, here we are one more time. Thanks again. And we've got the legislature in session. Last time we did talk a little bit about 1910, but we know that's not fully gone away. And now, of course, water is probably the biggest topic in front of us as we move forward. And Craig, your choice, take them one at a time or take them together, but your insight on what's happening at the moment.
Well, thanks, Len. I'm going to move the legislative session to the back because this is the drive to midnight on August 31st. Things have to pass both houses of origin and be signed and sent on to the governor, or they're dead for the year. And we believe 1910 is about 99.9% dead. So I'm going to go to the subject I think that's on everyone's mind right now. It's certainly on the governor's mind if you saw yesterday's headlines. And that's water. And this is a bit more of an issue. You know, it's funny, over the years, the droughts, some of the droughts begin in Northern California and then move to Southern California. And some have begun in Southern California and moved to Northern California. Well, this is one of the Southern California droughts that's come here first. So what I'd like to do is clear up a little bit of the confusion and put some of what is going on at the moment in context, and then what we might be able to expect in the next few moments, and then the few moments after that. And then past that point, just as Greg was many times mentioned in his presentation, we didn't know, and we still don't know what's going to happen with various, coronavirus variants. We don't know what Mother Nature has in store for us in the next precipitation year. The last time we were in a situation like this, 2016, Mother Nature bailed us out big time in 2017 and a little bit in 2018 as well. Be nice if that happens in 2023, but we have no guarantee of that. So as the old saying goes, plan for the worst and hope for the best. But here's what's going on, and here may allay some of the confusion that many of you may have. 2022 may look a lot like 2016 in terms of coming off 3 consecutive years of record dryness and lack of precipitation. Although I have to add that the last 3 years were worse than the 3 years that led up to the 2015-2016 crisis. But this time is worse in the sense that we arrived at this moment, at least in the southern part of the state, with our reservoirs or our reserve water much lower than it was the last time we faced this. And that forced the Metropolitan Water District, which is the largest water wholesaler in the United States. They are literally the purchaser of that water, which is imported from other places, from Northern California, the Sierra Snowpack through the State Water Project, and from the Colorado Basin, and then resells it to water providers all over Southern California. I think 26 districts in all, but about 19 million total customers. Now, not all 19 million of those customers are similarly affected, at least not at the moment. 6 million of them are cut off from the Colorado River supplies and totally dependent on the State Water Project. And since the state is sending us somewhere between 0% and 5% of normal amounts, Metropolitan Water District recognized that they needed to, for the first time in their history, issue to those they supply the need to immediately cut back so we don't run out of water before it begins raining and snowing again. So those 6 million customers are entirely within Ventura County, the entire city of Los Angeles area. And when it gets east of there, in some parts of eastern Los Angeles County, but not in others, dependent upon local sources. So for example, Pasadena is not in the immediately aggrieved area, but Arcadia right next to it is. And that's the complications of what I hope everyone understands when it comes to water supply. It's not a state issue. It's not even a regional issue. It becomes very much a local issue. So the Metropolitan Water District issued an edict effective June 1st, requiring all of its purchasers to cut back roughly, at about 35%, 30%, something like that, or to invoke various different iterations of their drought levels or phases or whatever they call them. Many places in Ventura County for standard outdoor watering, it's one night a week. Los Angeles Water and Power, which is the second largest servicer of golf courses in Southern California, the largest being the Coachella Valley Water District. However, the Coachella Valley Water District is not part of the Metropolitan Water District universe because it has a different set of allocations and because it has an incredibly generous supply right underneath it. Mother Nature has graced that area of the world with one of the richest and deepest aquifers in the world. And that's why, as I've had to tell many media organs over the years, do you think there wouldn't be 120 plus golf courses in a desert if there weren't a water source to irrigate them? It seems an obvious question, but one always has to pose it, particularly to Eastern media outlets that assume that when California goes into drought, it must be Palm Desert and Rancho Mirage that are most aggrieved. And I have to spend 45 minutes educating them as to why the opposite is the truth. Nonetheless, I'll get into something which is even going to affect them next year, probably for the first time as well. So water providers in Ventura, in Los Angeles, have had to, have to bring their golf community into compliance. And I have to say that while some of the treatment of the golf community has been a little bit rough in media organs, it's been, golf has worked quite well with most of the water providers. And I think Los Angeles Water and Power is probably the best example. We've just finished weeks and weeks and weeks of intense discussions in order to bring all the golf courses within that service district within alignment of their need to cut, or they get serious fines from the Metropolitan Water District, but to do it in ways that are consistent with sound agronomic and business practice. Remember, all those things you read about outdoor watering and the distinctions between functional turf and non-functional turf. Well, non-functional turf are pretty lawns and backyards, and we can let those go in a crisis. Functional turf is that turf which is central to the activity, or central, whether it's recreational or in the case of golf, it's a combination of recreational or business. And under California law, which is generally incorporated into most of the local codes, the highest priority among the functional turf are those things called special landscape areas, or in some cases large landscapes, and those are parks, cemeteries, sports fields, and golf courses. And it doesn't matter whether the golf course is also a park, as in municipal courses, or a private club. There is no distinction because what the central organizing principle of that distinction is the biological needs of turf, which has a certain evapotranspiration factor that's, say, quite a bit different than a cactus, which doesn't require as much irrigation. So I'm not going to go into the details, though details have been put out by the SCGA in various reports, and I know the Southern Cal PGA section has sent those out to many of you, and that's available on our website. But we agree with the state of California that that's almost the best practice in how you bring golf courses into alignment with these mandates. And of course, it's quite a bit different, and bring it into alignment in such a way that long-term, you're creating incentives for those golf facilities over time to make the investments necessary. And yes, there are investments that are necessary. It costs money to reduce water footprints, whether it's to change out the warm season grasses, whether it's to upgrade your irrigation system, to reline lakes, or the big one, turf removal. Those things cost massive amounts of money. And in order to incentivize golf courses to make those investments, they can't be penalized at the back end or during an emergency in a drought. They need to be rewarded. Those are funny verbs to use, but I think everyone knows what I mean. So that right now there's a differential impact. So some of those golf courses I mentioned that are on these diet budgets right now are some of them are going to are in alignment already because they've done so many things in the past 10 years to reduce their water consumption and there's no difference. And I have to tell the media this as well, when they complain that, well, if golf course A is cutting back 30%, but golf course B only 5% because they've reduced, what good does that do us in terms of meeting the moment? And then I have to point out to them that all of those homeowners and small businesses that got tired of letting all their grasses and their little water consumptive saplings die out every time there was a drought and redid everything in California friendly drought tolerant cover. Now you're telling them to water 2 nights a week. They're probably only watering 1 night a week now. That's why they did what they did. So if you think about it, you're saving 0 water from them, at least when it comes to the golf courses, even the most responsible among them. And we discovered in the Los Angeles service area that there were a couple as high as using 45% less water in 2021 than they had in the average of the first 10 years of the 21st century, which is remarkable because 2021 was the driest year on record. So that kind of performance, if it's penalized, you're in essence going to put those clubs out of business. If it's rewarded, you've in essence allowed them to get through this moment in recognition of them having arrived at that moment. I'm sorry for the length. I apologize a little bit for the excruciating detail involved, but you're going to get those questions, whether you're GMs, golf professionals, superintendents, golf devotees, from laymen who don't understand, I think, the depth of these principles. And the real defense of the golf industry is not cheerleading on all the great things we do, but putting out the actual facts that we have been promoting. At least in the southern half of the state, we've been working for over 10 years with water districts and water providers with them to create policies that create incentives for us doing the things that collectively we understand we need to do to reduce water footprints. Now, having stated that 6 million customers are under these draconian restrictions already, the other 13 million are not far behind, because it's just a matter of days, if not, or maybe weeks. Either the 7 states that are part of the Colorado Compact in the far west are going to come to agreement. Increasingly, it looks like they're not going to come to agreement, or the federal government through the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation is going to come to agreement for us all. And because there's an immediate need to cut 2 to 4 million acre feet annually of water consumption out of the Colorado Basin. I would, say in essence, in order to keep the lights on in Las Vegas and Phoenix, mostly Phoenix, and in order to keep some of those reservoirs from falling, below the critical mass necessary to generate electricity. That's how dire the situation is. When that happens, the other 13 million customers, I don't know whether they'll end up under the same level of restriction as the 6 million in LA and Ventura that are now, but it'll be something close to that. So this has been a good practice run. Orange County, San Diego, and other places are not going to be immune. And ultimately, because the situation is the same, I'm seeing that Alameda County has gone to some rather high level of drought restrictions, and you're going to see this play out in Northern California as well. I think the good news in all of this is the preliminary returns from the actual citizenry are that we're all saving water. Now you'll read reports the Bay Area is doing a better job than Southern California. I might also add it's a lot hotter and drier down here, so you need to compare that to ETO, but that's something that often gets missed in the press accounts, but those of us who are in the golf community understand the importance of that in terms of irrigation efficiency. So all of that leads me up to what the governor did yesterday, which was issue a very ambitious 16-page report. Again, we distributed that yesterday, and I know the Southern Cal PGA distributed it. It's on websites. It's on the front page of every newspaper. And what it amounts to is, I think, a version of what was pioneered in the city of LA and is now the Metropolitan Water District carries, which is a one water philosophy. The recognition that that we are not, if conservation is the only tool in our toolbox to get through this, it's not going to work. We're aware that, and I don't want to get political here because this tends to raise people's hackles. I'm not going to give the reason. We don't know I'll stipulate that we're not going to go into the reasons for the following, but the fact is the following. California's climate is warmer and it's drier. And that has led us to a situation in which more of our precipitation, even if it's an average or above average year, falls as rain than as snow. And the snowpack in the Sierra Nevada is the way in which we've predicated all of our storage and conveyance techniques around that snowpack. And so there's less snow, more of it comes as rain. We don't capture that rain. Most of it runs out into the ocean. We do try to capture the snow melt, but with less snow, there's less that melts in an average year. And then with the soil being drier, more of that gets absorbed with the the atmosphere being drier, more of that gets absorbed, and we end up with less water. And in fact, the governor's plan is predicated upon even average snowfalls and rainfalls, assuming the average holds, yielding about 10% less volume. And that's a substantial amount. So in light of that, that doesn't mean we're without tools, but it does mean that the state is going to be pivoting towards massive expenditures. As I put it yesterday in a post, we're coming sort of to the same era that we saw in California in the first 60 years of the 20th century, in which we built all of these water project, conveyance project, the state water project, massive public investments. And we're on the cusp of another set of massive public investments. This time we're going to finish off a couple of things like the site's reservoir, but in addition to that, going to go for desalination. And it's not just a Pacific Ocean phenomenon. It also deals with saltwater intruded rivers up in the northern part of the state, brackish groundwater everywhere that can be desalted and used. In addition to that, stormwater capture. LA County is ahead of that. The voters here passed Measure W a few years ago that made available a lot of money to capture, clean, and then recycle stormwater, and to use it to replenish or to recharge aquifers. That's another strategy that's all part of this One Water and this pivot. Interestingly, our governor yesterday said that if we don't find a way to reform our planning and permitting processes, we won't be able to do any of this. So I think we're on the cusp also of being able to do what we did in the first 60 years of the 20th century, and that is actually go from planning to permitting to construction to availing ourselves of these benefits of these infrastructure projects in something less than 25 years, and probably going to eliminate some of what I would call the judicial nuisance suits that delay these things for various reasons. Now, most of the water districts and water officials applauded what the governor did. I'll give my own opinion here. I'll applaud it as well. And I'll tell you what the implications are and why I'm going to excruciating detail for the golf industry in just a moment. It was criticized by some environmental groups that don't think there's enough environmental remediation involved. And of course, the usual attacks that it didn't focus enough on agricultural use as some would like, keeping in mind that 80% of the water that's used in the state does go to agriculture, and only about 11% to urban use, and most of golf use is within that category. So I think you understand why conservation isn't going to work. We're going to have to up our actual supplies, and that's going to cost money. And the reason I keep preaching this to the golf community is that it's not so much a question of whether all these things are going to go forward. And to a community that seems to think that the business planning is about cost cutting, do understand that there's also another side of it. It's about investing. And when it comes down to spending, the good news is if we don't do those projects and spend that money, there will not be 1,000 golf courses in California 20 years from now. There'll be half that many. So we need that to happen. And we need to understand that we have to participate in the decision-making, because sometimes these expenditures can be drawn up in a way that's very friendly to golf, or fair to golf, I would say. Now, friendly is the wrong word, as in Measure W in LA County, which was almost structured to be extraordinarily equitable and fair to golf community. That was a parcel fee, by the way. Or it can basically ding us, and we use a lot of land. So anything which is attached to property, when you use 200 acres of it, depending upon how much of the 200 acres are subject, and depending how these things are financed, they can be put entirely on ratepayers, or it can be put on the collective, or a combination of the two. But increasingly, water is often the second highest item on a golf course expense ledger, and increasingly moving up to number one. So we are incredible water consumers, even though we're reducing our water footprint. The bills are going up faster than the reductions are going up. But of course, the alternative is to be put out of business. So we absolutely have to get in the game of participating in these decisions. And a read my lips, no new fees and taxes stance is just going to put us on the outside looking in, and others will structure these expenditures to their benefit and not to ours. Enough said. brings me to item number 3 that I wanted to talk to you about today. So all of golf's organizations in the southern part of the state, led primarily by the SCGA and the USGA, and I say that only because we're kind of underwriting the whole thing. We're agreeing to pick up all the expenses that others don't, in conjunction, tellingly, with our partner, the Metropolitan Water District. And it's important that they're partnering with us and participating in a huge water summit next week at Los Serranos Golf Course in Chino Hills. Over 200 persons are now registered for the event, and it's the eclectic audience that we sought when we scoped this out. So it's not just the usual superintendents and GMs. Yeah, there are plenty of them in attendance, but there are water officials from myriad districts: Pasadena, Long Beach, Los Angeles Water and Power. I think Callejas is there, and of course the Metropolitan Water District is our keynote speaker, and they're our closing panel. And so that sends a powerful message that all of golf, that we are, the message that we want is that rather than fighting these things, we are actually in collaboration with water providers and water districts, because we have a common goal and that we're working with them to reduce our water footprint, as opposed to working against them as some other industries have chosen to do. Very pleased that the United States Golf Association has stepped up big time to co-sponsor the event, to invest quite a bit of it, to cover it, which is consistent, I think, with Mike Wan's announced pivot, which didn't get much play during the US Open, because there's something about, there's this tour in Saudi Arabia that seems to be funded by Saudi Arabia, that seems to be crowding all other issues off. But long-term, water will determine our fate here in California far more than squabbles between two tours, although anyway, I won't go into that one. That's beyond my bandwidth to discuss. But I think everyone's coalescing around the notion that water is this incredible and number one issue in the Southwest. There's probably, I'm going to say there's a waiting list for this, but if you need to get in, sometimes people cancel. I'd encourage you to still either go to the SCGA landing page or go to the Southern Cal PGA section and see if you can get into it. It'll be educational, to be sure, from a lot of different perspectives. But if I would say, if there's a theme to this overall that we hope that the world takes away, because as those of you who have listened to me over the years know that my plea has been, we speak to ourselves repeatedly, consistently, and we do it admirably. We need to speak to the 90% of the world that doesn't play golf. And in many respects, this conference, because it'll be covered on the day of, and we're going to go to quite a bit of expense to make sure it can be covered in myriad ways after the conference, so that we can project to the world sort of the following. Golf has done a great deal in the last 20, 25 years to reduce its water footprint. And that great deal has cost us a lot of money. We've made those investments. I reviewed some of those things. Switch over of grasses, research in those grasses, soil sensors, the maximally efficient irrigation systems, removal of water features, turf removal, and various things, and all kinds of, what I would call water-wise techniques. As much as we've done, and as much as that's a laurel I think we can put out there for the world, we can't rest on that. That brought us to this moment. But if we use that as a springboard to give us confidence and give the world's confidence that we can continue to make those investments and do that research and do those things to reduce that water footprint further and faster, then we're going to continue to be able to provide this great game, this recreational activity to 1,000 golf courses and maybe more in California, because we will have aligned our way of doing business consistent with the needs that I think are amply demonstrated in the governor's plan yesterday, that aridification has dealt us a very, very different hand. And we can whine about that hand, or we can go ahead and play it to our best of ability. And I think the last 20 years of the golf community demonstrates that we have the capacity to play that hand, and to play that hand well. And we should be proud about that. But again, we shouldn't be arrogant about that. We should be, in essence, seeking to convince those that we can go that much further and that much faster moving forward. I spent a lot of time on water, and Len wanted me to talk about the legislative session. So I will close with that very, very, very briefly on the legislative session. They're back in session. They're in their race to see which bills can get through both houses and signed before midnight on the last day of this month and sent on to the governor, and then see which of those bills the governor elects to sign or to veto. Clearly, in this session, there's a bill that's moving, it has now moved through. It's going to make its way to the governor's desk with a ban on neonicotinoids, which are used in the golf community. I think our obsession with, rightful obsession with Assembly Bills 672 and 1910 probably crowded out a little bit of our engagement with that bill. We might have been able to do a little bit better, but we can survive that in a way that we couldn't have survived 1910. So for the most part, the residue of 1910 is, well, we kicked it in the backside, and that's good. Now, those of us who were involved in that know that, like all things, we did a lot of things well, but we also got caught a couple of lucky breaks, and we could have caught a couple of unlucky breaks, and I could be saying something very different right now. Suffice it to say that while the bill is dead, the issues that animated it and the interests that push it are very much alive. And one of the things you need to know, and I won't go into the details because they're exhaustingly detailed, is that those of us in the California Alliance for Golf are seeking what I would call good counsel on the Surplus Land Act, which is key to so many of the conversions we've talked about, and figuring out the difference between surplus land and exempt surplus land, moving forward into 2023, because I think that'll be the key to our continuing ability to sort of defend our turf. And our turf is our problem. It's we use a lot of land, and we can't escape that. That's our existential challenge. But we're vulnerable in many ways. And the way you overcome vulnerability is to at least have a thorough understanding of what it is. And we're in the process of acquiring that well before we get into 2023, because we expect that what has basically been happening is, after a couple of generations of California law creating a lot of preferences for recreational use and open space, in deference to our housing crunch, increasingly, in fact, the Surplus Land Act's been amended 5 times since 2019 to move housing up as a sort of a second priority, and very soon it'll be a higher priority than recreation and open space. And that in and of itself is not the problem. What the problem is when people have an opportunity to make a lot of money off of something, they will try to do that. And again, golf remains extraordinarily vulnerable from that perspective, and remains vulnerable in terms of public relations coming into next year. I do expect the property tax advantages that all golf courses in the state of California have as basically open space, to be under attack from those who've always been bothered by that. But the US Open's coming to Los Angeles next year at the Los Angeles Country Club. And we were already seeing Malcolm Gladwell and others, they're ginning up to put that out there. Now, that would require a constitutional amendment to change it, but to the degree to which that's going to be the same kind of populist rant against the game that we saw in 1910 and 672, it causes harm to us. And particularly at a moment when we're very sensitive about our water use. And that sensitivity more goes to public opinion, which is often uninformed or is informed by headlines, than it is with actual government agencies who understand the facts and understand us a little better and understand sort of our open-mindedness on working with them on common goals. So keeping all of that in mind, again, I don't expect any great surprises between now and August 31st in this session, but suffice it to say, we are gearing up to be ready for the 2023 session. And while I don't think we will see a version of 1910 again, although we may, one of the things, and I'm not going to explicate them for them, one of the things that became very apparent to me in actually fighting that bill was that the proponents of it made mistakes. And if I can see the mistakes they made, well, it's a good thing they made mistakes from our point of view. If I can see the mistakes, I'm going to assume that they can see their mistakes and they can see their way to curing those mistakes, perhaps in something in 2023. The author of the bill will not be in the legislature next year. So that's good news from that count because she seemed very passionate about it. And the other piece of good news is that in golf's fight against it, and I want to emphasize golf's fight against that was all the thousands of rank and file golfers that took the time to contact their members of the state assembly or state senate to let them know that as constituents, they were not interested parties. Their only interest was they liked playing golf. They thought this was a bad idea. They liked open space. They liked green space. They liked the environmental and recreational and health advantages. And they thought that stripping those things out to put in housing complexes was a bad idea. That had far more to do with, I think, the demise of that bill than all the brilliant strategies that those of us who fought it in Sacramento employed. Keep that in mind moving forward. People power always matters the most, not legal, not lawsuits, and not fancy strategies and so forth, but real live voters and real live districts. Never forget that. And when you're thinking about, should I send that email? Should I make that phone call? Should I drop that letter? Do it. Particularly if you work in the golf industry, do it. It makes all the difference in the world. We did gain a lot of support for golf's cause during that fight. And we were able to get a lot of facts out there that weren't in the stream before. So by being attacked, we were able to defend ourselves with facts and evidence that many accepted. And the good news was a lot of assembly districts that were demographically and politically similar to the author of the bill ended up opposing that bill. And that's one of the reasons that it disappeared in the appropriations process. And truth be known, this is not a truth that's widely out there. Even had it made it out of the appropriations process, it would have been significantly amended and weakened before it would have made it to the floor of the assembly. And that's assuming when it got to the Senate, even that weakened bill would have passed, which I don't think it would have. So that was a very valuable exercise. We took a gamble because well before we started a campaign, we indicated that we were going to run this campaign, which meant that if had it fizzled out, had you golfers and you golf professionals, GMs and superintendents and those in the community not responded, we would have demonstrated our weakness publicly. Instead, we demonstrated our strength. And while we shouldn't, do any victory parades or victory trots and so forth, we should take pride in the fact that we did get that message out there that golf, that a lot of people, there are over 3 million persons in this state play the game. And when you attack it, they care. And that's what matters the most, I think, in politics. So I hadn't planned to filibuster this long, but clearly there are a lot of things on my plate. So Len, you always ask me a hard question out of left field, so have at it,
No, Craig, that was great. Thank you. We're talking to the choir. You're absolutely right. We're talking more outside of ourselves now. But I as you mentioned, the mistakes that the legislators made that played into our benefit, I would have to say your last comment was probably the most telling, and that mistake would be their underestimation of the response from the people they represent. I would say in some cases they thought they had a slam dunk, and from all corners they ran into opposition. And as you mentioned, the people spoke, and the people spoke loudly. So I think, and in a positive way. And in a positive way, it wasn't presented as anything to be anti-housing, but that there are a number of other issues. So would you agree, Craig, that, and you said it, the power of the people in this one was well underestimated by them, and that really served to knock this down?
Yeah, and I think it was important. Golf was very careful to point out that what was odious about this bill was that, yes, if housing is a huge problem, then golf is was not averse to participating. If you put everyone in the mix, and we lost a few golfers to help solve a housing problem, that's one thing. We would not object to this. But to put it in context, The Santa Monica Mountains Conservancy, which is almost entirely within the city limits of Los Angeles, protects by law 155,000 acres from any form of development. Mind you, that's in the city of LA. If you take all 960 golf courses in the state of California, all of them, and add up their acreage, and they're not contiguous as they are in the Santa Monica Mountains, it's 144,000 acres. So what are we talking about? That's not a brief for developing the Santa Monica Mountains, but it's also not a brief for chopping up little golf courses in areas that are part of the public parkland systems. And I think those were the things that we were able to put forward at a high level. And at the level you just discussed, what they underestimated was they kind of looked at us. I mean, golf's not all that political. As you know, Len, we're trying to up our game in Sacramento. They looked around and they said, well, we see all kinds, we see trial lawyers and we see Western States Petroleum and we see all kinds of big political players. And by the way, the Yimbys who push us, they're big political players too. We don't see golf. You're right though, what they failed to see is 3.5 million people play this game. And the people who play it are not the kind of interested parties. Again, persons on this call work in the industry, so that's one thing. But the people who called their legislators, they had no financial interest. They just thought this was a really dumb idea and were passionate enough to call them up. And not all of them were golfers. Some of them just enjoyed the green space in their community and thought that was better than having a housing complex, which they suspected might not be affordable.
It also proves to me, Craig, that if you're a legislator, especially particularly in the House, you really can no longer just represent the block you live on, that got you elected. You have to pay attention to your constituency, and you have to realize in elementary terms what else is out there, because you're representing everybody. You're not just representing that little cadre that you have within arm's length. And I think that, to me, that's what was proven over and over and again with this.
And the other thing was, ultimately, if you got all your facts wrong, sometimes you can get tripped up. And the proponents of 1910, when they got contradicted by the National Golf Foundation and the USGA and so many others that weighed in on this with just the facts of the matter, you begin to wonder, if you were wrong about these premises, what else are you wrong about? And that's why I always preach, we need to be scrupulously accurate in everything we say and transparent, which includes sometimes being the first ones to announce certain things about us that we're not all that proud of. They're going to find out anyway. So if they find out from us, they'll trust us. If they have to find out on their own, not so much. And I would, if anyone's listening from Arizona, take that for what it's worth.
Yeah.
Great, Craig. Well, thank you. Thank you for the update. And again, your tremendous insight and sticking so close to that. So one more time, August the 18th, that would be a week from yesterday, right? It will be at Serrano's Golf Club, the Southern California Water Summit, if you will. And then I'll also point out that as of about yesterday too, we have found December 7, a date in American history, certainly on its own for that same summit here in Northern California at Boundary Oak Golf Course in Walnut Creek. So we're taking it seriously and we're covering the state. And with that, probably time to wrap. Tom?
Yeah, thanks, Craig, again, and of course, Greg and everyone involved, Bryce, Steve, and Nikki, and everybody. Our next chat is scheduled for Friday, September 9th. So we look forward to seeing you in just under a month. Len, appreciate it as always. And everybody have a great weekend and enjoy golf.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Tom. Again, yeah, perfect. September 9th, we'll see you again. Please stay healthy. Please stay safe. Enjoy the weekend, catch the playoffs, and we'll move forward. Onward we go. Thank you.